Hey, this is Bradley Chubb, and you're listening to The Snap.
Hey, this is Cortland Sutton,
Hey, this is Tim Patrick.
and you're listening to The Snap
With Sidney Jones
on Broncos.
Podcast Network. Yeah.
What's up, Broncos country? Welcome back inside the UC Health Training Center for this week's edition of The Snap. Team reporter and host Sidney Jones here, and it's week 6 of the regular season. And the Denver Broncos are back on prime time as they are set to face the Chargers in Los Angeles on Monday night football. So joining me on today's episode of The Snap to take a look at this matchup is Chargers team reporter Hayley Elwood. Hayley, it's so wonderful to see you again. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. It wouldn't be Broncos Chargers without this, right?
I know.
Tradition at this.
It is. I love it. Well, Hayley, week 6 already. I can't even believe I'm saying that. How's the season been going for you so far? It's flying by over here.
Flying by. That's the craziest thing. We're always in training camp going, gosh, these days just drag, and you're in the dog days of camp. And granted, we're not the ones actually like doing like physical work out there.
True.
Like it goes on. And then all of a sudden week 1 hits and you blink and you're here in week 6. And it's just like, it's so hard to explain for those people who don't work in the NFL what this is like. And in a weird way, sometimes it feels like it goes slow and fast simultaneously.
Right.
Every year, it doesn't matter. You're always at this point, you're like, man, it's already week 6. We're already a quarter of the way done, whatever that math is with this 17th how that we count. But you know, it's good. We're grinding and here we are.
Yep, exactly. Well, Hayley, I know the Chargers, they're heading into this matchup on a 2-game win streak, you know, both wins on the road. What's the mood over there in the building? What's the vibe in the locker room?
Yeah, you know, I think after that Jacksonville Jaguars game, when the team was 1-2, I had said this on another podcast that I was on, that this was uncharted territory for the Brandon Staley era of coaching the Chargers. That team had never been under 500 before. And so seeing how they were going to respond was going to be really, really huge. And I think the one word that I would use is resilience. They've shown a lot of resilience over these last 2 games, and you can attribute that to a lot of different things. Resilience in a way of overcoming some of the really severe injuries that they have accrued over the course of the season. I mean, losing Joey Bosa, losing Rashawn Slater at left tackle, both in that same game it happened. It felt like a double whammy at that point. And how are you going to overcome this? And you've seen production, you know, defensively from Chris Rumph, Kyle Van Noy at times, even maybe Derwin James, and then offensively with Jamari Salyer filling in for Rashawn Slater. They've also gotten some things going in their advantage. And one of those is being able to start running the ball efficiently. And that is just something that I think they had to work through over the beginning of the season. This is a team that their starting offense and defense didn't play in the preseason. And so when you look at that and you think, oh, here we are in week 6, sometimes you feel like maybe it should have clicked already, but I think at some point it just certain things might take time. And Brandon Staley has said that the more that these groups play together, the better that they're going to be. And I think you are seeing some positive production, specifically from that run game, that offense,
for sure,
moving forward. But I think overall, I would just say that it's a resilient group right now that's been kind of battle tested. And I forget who it was. I think it might have been Austin Ekeler, who a few weeks ago said, hey, maybe it was good that some of this adversity that we faced happened so early on, so that you're not just kind of rolling and cruising and then, oh, shoot, Joey, or oh, shoot, you lose Slater. Or, you know, we always kind of now forget that Herbert's even still dealing with the fractured rib cartilage as well, even though it doesn't look like he is.
I know. It's crazy. He bounced back so fast from that.
I know. It's bananas. But, you know, maybe it is good to a point that it hit them early where they could kind of correct it early on. And while they're still sort of trying to figure out the identity of who they are versus have it happen later in the season.
For sure. I think kind of the same thing applies for this Broncos team too. I think back to last season, we were 3-0 to start the season. And obviously we know how that ended up last year. But this year, you know, our fans are so upset because, you know, we're 2-3 right now, and this offense doesn't look the way that they want. But I think it's good that they're having this adversity so early on, so that maybe in the later half of the season, this offense really clicks and gets going. It's better to be better later on.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. And you also, I think, can look to some of the guys in both of these teams' locker rooms. And obviously on the Broncos, I can't speak for you, but just watching Russell Wilson for so many years and the leadership quality that he brings, it just is hard for me. And I've said this before, it's hard to me to count this Broncos team out as, you know, as we trend into the 6th game. Just can't see that happening.
No, definitely. Well, Hayley, I know Justin Herbert and company, they've been putting up a lot of points. That offense ranks second in the league, I think, in passing yards per game. Kind of what are your expectations for him Monday night going up against this defense that's playing at a really high level right now?
This Broncos defense is incredible. And I'm going to give you guys props for a second because when I was doing my research for the game, the first thing that stood out to me was the fact that the Broncos have the number one ranked red zone defense. And I believe the Chargers are in the 20s in red zone offense. So I feel like something's got to give there, specifically from the Chargers offensive perspective, if they want to have success against Denver's defense. When it comes to the offense in general, I think you might see kind of what you saw last week against Cleveland, and that's maybe just really taking advantage of the short passing game. It's something that Justin Herbert did really, really well and kind of had to, knowing that you had Myles Garrett and Jadeveon Clowney on the edges in that one. So I think, and the other thing too is being able to run the ball effectively, which is something that, like I said, they really kind of have started to get in their groove and find their groove over these last two games. Joe Lombardi today talked about it, and he said, look, it's encouraging, but we can't always, every week is a new week in the NFL and we can't guarantee anything for the future. But the more that you sort of stack some of these performances on top of one another, you hope that gets going. So I think see a combo of maybe some of the short passing game coupled with hopefully getting that run game going. And then Chargers fans always want the deep shots. They always want Justin to and we'll see if that's the case. We don't know the status of Keenan Allen as of this point, as you and I tape this, but Mike Williams has certainly just been such a consistent player for this Chargers offense. And Brandon Staley has said when he touches the ball, it's really, really good for us. So you hope to see as a Chargers fan for him to get involved as well.
Hayley, you mentioned the run game a couple times now. I know Chargers running back Austin Ekeler, he's coming off a career high 173-yard game versus the Browns. You mentioned this run game really clicking. What do you think was it what was it last week that really clicked for them?
I think it comes down to sort of what Austin said, which was just them sort of trying to find their rhythm. And again, it goes back to some of the attrition that they faced along the offensive line as well. Lombardi has said it's not just one guy, it's a combination group of everyone on the offensive line, the quarterback, the running back, to be able to get that going effectively. And so when you look at it, Austin Ekeler goes, look, we're practicing great. Things are going well in practice, but for some reason in the game, it just wasn't really working out. But now you're seeing it click. You're seeing it come together. He specifically talked about maybe moving some of their run schemes to complement some of the new additions that they have on that offensive line. So instead of running outside the tackles, you run inside through the A gap, through the B gap. Try to sort of find those mismatches and those things that really, really help you become a more effective run game and rushing offense. And as Lombardi said, Ekeler, though, he was in the zone on Sunday. And when that guy gets going, he's a huge fantasy football nut. He's advice every week. And people were really down on him. And I know he was kind of telling people, hey, keep the faith. We got this. He certainly got it going last week against Cleveland. And now that he sort of found that groove, again, it's just being able to sort of keep it going. But I think it comes down to just everyone sort of executing. And that's a word we hear all the time in the NFL and making sure that people are executing properly. But I think it finally just started to work. And again, I'll go back to just sort of the lack of preseason reps. They didn't really have them. And this offensive line didn't really play together either. So working with some of those new pieces, getting everyone on the same page, I think has boded really well for that group.
Hayley, I know you mentioned Keenan Allen a little bit earlier. Not sure of his status for the game yet. I know he's been out for the past 4 games with a hamstring injury, but has been limited at practice. So positive sign for you guys. What do you think it would really mean if he does return on Monday night alongside, Mike Williams, who's just been having such success this season? What do you think it'll mean for this Broncos secondary, who is a little bit banged up now that Ronald Darby's on injured reserve?
I think it just means everything in terms of this Chargers offense being able to add that number one receiver dynamic, which again, Mike Williams has done a fantastic job filling in. But when it comes to Keenan, he's an established veteran in this league. He just sort of, it sounds dumb to say, but gets it at this point in his career. And it's so easy for him and cerebral for him to get out there and find those mismatches on the field. I'm sure he'd love to be back for this game, just knowing the divisional aspect of it in that regard. But I just think he adds that extra dimension and that comfort that he has with Justin Herbert. And the fact that those two, they've only been together for 2 going on 3 years now, but that rapport is so natural. And for those of us who are around Keenan during the Phillip Rivers era, and I started with the Chargers Keenan's second season in the league, so I saw a lot of it. And you saw that same sort of just natural vibe that the two of them had, and now he's carried that over to finding that rapport with Justin Herbert. So I just think he adds that extra dimension, that extra little oomph for this offense. And it's also, when you flip it to the Broncos defense, having to account for him and Mike, having to account for both of those.
It's gonna be tough.
Yeah, which is just super huge. And it's kind of like a pick your poison at that point.
For sure. Well, Hayley, I know Chargers head coach Brandon Staley praised this Broncos receiving core this week during one of his press conferences, saying just how tough they are to cover. And just overall, the offense is dangerous. I know maybe this record doesn't show that, but I know him and the rest of the Chargers team, they're not overlooking what Russell Wilson and this offense can do. But, looking at this Chargers secondary, you guys are legit. I mean, Derwin James, Bryce Callahan, someone we know so well. It's gonna be tough matchups all around.
Tough matchups all around. And I think that's exactly what, he's not obviously playing defense, but someone that Austin Ekeler said this week, he's like, we're not looking at the Broncos for their record. We're looking at them as a team. There are a lot of people who think Denver could be 5-0 at this point. It's just been a play here or there, little things that just haven't gone necessarily the team's way. But it's a good matchup in that regard. There's some, question marks and just sort of some interesting things that happened with this Chargers secondary last week. For instance, Alohi Gilman getting the start at safety over Nasir Adderley. Is that something we see continue into this week? But the impact of Derwin has just been so big. And when he is healthy, which is something that he struggled with earlier in his career. He's really been able to kind of come into his own over these last couple of years. Yeah. He's just such a commanding presence on that field. And he does everything. I mean, he is literally everywhere. Sometimes he'll play, in a season, he can pick up 5 different positions or so, just being moved around all over the field. So I think, when you look at those matchups, it's tough overall, but it should be a good game. And I think it is one of those games, though, that you just throw the records out the window and you just play. I said this, I had Mina Kimes on my podcast earlier today. When the AFC West plays in prime time, it's always weird. Something weird happens.
Something crazy happens.
Strange. Yeah. Something crazy happens. We saw it Monday night with the Chiefs and the Raiders.
Oh, yeah.
Always really strange. So I think it's just going to be one of those things that this team is certainly going to have to be on their P's and Q's because they are not taking Denver lightly at all.
Yeah. Well, Hayley, a couple more here for you. I know Khalil Mack and just this Chargers defense, they failed to record a sack versus the Browns last Sunday, but how do you think they'll rebound, and how do you think the pass rush will fare going up against, a Broncos offensive line that's a little bit beat up right now, especially being without left tackle Garrett Bowles, who was placed on IR a little bit earlier this week?
Yeah, when you look at that game last week against Cleveland, Brandon Staley had said he called it a tough, rugged game for those outside linebackers, edge players on this Chargers team, that they had their hands full, obviously, with the Cleveland run game. And so being able to get pressure was just really difficult for them because they were just kind of having to go at it on the edge all game long. Okay. So when you look at that matchup, though, against an offensive line that you mentioned is dealing with some attrition right now, I think someone like Khalil Mack is probably licking his chops at that, just being able to hopefully get that going. Losing Joey Bosa against the Jaguars was huge, and there are reports that he could be back at some point this season, which would be fantastic and phenomenal. But they are needing to sort of get extra edge help from that guy on the other side opposite of Mack. So the thing is, as I've said before, you can double team Khalil Mack if you need to in order to be able to sort of mitigate his presence. I mean, all offseason long, you're talking about the edge rushers on these teams in the AFC West, and you're talking about Bosa and Mack. And so when you have 50% of that, it's easier to account. But at the same time, when you're dealing with some attrition and when you're having maybe some new bodies in there that aren't as familiar, I think that's maybe where the veteran presence of Khalil Mack can come into play and sort of, on our perspective, hopefully have a day against the Broncos, as I say this very nicely.
No,
but I think you look at that from that perspective, and it'll be one of those matchups that we'll just kind of wait and see what happens, but it should be good.
Yeah. Well, Hayley, last one here for you. Obviously the Chargers are 3-2, Broncos are 2-3. I know both sides are saying this is a must-win game for each team. I'm going to put you on the spot here. What's your game prediction? What do you think is going to happen Monday night?
Oh, like I'm telling you, Sid, weird stuff happens.
I know. It's always fun when the Chargers and
Always
Broncos
fun.
play.
And here's what I have said about the Broncos in general. This is a team that the Chargers have pretty much split with over the last few years.
So
It is
true.
a team that, I'll say this and you don't have to make any sort of comments, but maybe had some subpar quarterback play when you compare maybe a Drew Lock to a Russell Wilson, the Super Bowl winning quarterback that we know him to be.
Right.
Might not be currently at that level, but again, I think he's going to figure it out. I just have this feeling that they will. So
maybe they will against the Chargers this Monday.
yeah, I think when you look at this matchup, I just don't necessarily, again, think that it's one that you can look at the records and go, hey, this is the better team. Of course, I think the Chargers, I think health kind of seems to be getting on their side at this point in the season, losing players excluded, but maybe some of these guys, maybe someone like Keenan is back, which adds that extra element to the offense. I just think, though, that one of the biggest keys for this game from the Chargers' perspective is going to be stopping the run and needing to stop that run. And I know someone like Melvin Gordon is going to want to have that game against the Chargers, as he always tends to have over the last couple of years. So that is something, though, that when you look at this Chargers defense, they haven't done particularly well. And Brandon Staley has sometimes called that group a work in progress. They're still kind of working through things. So I think that'll be a huge focal point of this game. Can they stop the run? Can they stop Melvin Gordon? Can they stop this Broncos offense on the ground in terms of maybe that being something that might take some pressure off of Russell Wilson on the flip side? So I think when you look at it, that's sort of a key that I'm going to be watching on Monday night. But overall, it should be a lot of fun. It's always great. I love it when these two teams meet in prime time too, because it's an extra little added element of oomph and should be just really, really exciting.
For sure. And this will be the first primetime game for the Chargers at SoFi, right?
Yep, at SoFi. So they played week 2 in Kansas City, and this is the first one.
First one at home
this season. Yep. So that'll be a lot of fun too. This is a game where I get there just extremely early. Be stuck in traffic.
Oh my gosh, yeah, especially on a Monday night.
Yeah, that's like we're gonna get there at like noon that day. 5:15 or whatever it is, kickoff.
For sure.
The more exciting, the more hype build up, the more exciting it is, I guess.
The better. Yeah. Well, Hayley, I appreciate your insight and your time so much. Thank you for joining me today.
Thanks, Sydney. So happy to be here.
Well, that'll do it for this week's episode of The Snap. Broncos Country, thanks so much for tuning in. And thank you again to Hayley Elwood for being this week's guest. Make sure to follow the Broncos Podcast Network on Twitter to stay up to date on The Snap's latest episodes. I'll see you all right back here next week for another edition. Have a great weekend.